amid a wave of Democrat attacks on conservative bigwigs, Joe Biden announces another run at the White House. That's the topic of today's Bold and Blunt, and I'm your host, Cheryl Chumley, giving you a Christian conservative look at today's news, politics, culture, and events. And the big news of the day is Joe Biden has formally announced he is running for president once again. Does America really need this? Can America really deal with another 4 years of Joe Biden? Good Lord, I say no. And before I get into all that, I want to quickly mention, if you like Bold and Blunt, you may get Bold and Blunt at edify.app, the online platform for your faith-based podcasts, anywhere podcasts are offered, of course, and at washingtontimes.com, where you may also sign up for my 3 times a week newsletter. Just go to washingtontimes.com, scroll to the bottom of the page, find the newsletter section, click on it, find my particular section among all the fine newsletters that the Washington Times puts out, click on that, and sign up for my Bold and Blunt newsletter delivered to your email box 3 times a week, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, along with my twice weekly Bold and Blunt podcasts. You won't be sorry, particularly when you have to deal with Democratic Party speeches like this one.
Freedom, personal freedom, is fundamental to who we are as Americans. There's nothing more important, nothing more sacred. That's been the work of my first term.
Has it really? Has Joe Biden done so much to preserve freedom, individual freedom, in his first White House administration? I don't see it. Under Joe Biden, after all, the entire nation was shut down due, he would say, to saving citizens from the death of the coronavirus. But there were so many lies tied up with this Joe Biden's administration in terms of using the coronavirus to justify the seizure of individual liberties and the lockdown of American society that they were very difficult to keep track of. I mean, we're still trying to come to a final tally on all the lies told about the coronavirus. But under Joe Biden, remember, think back, under Joe Biden, and this wasn't very long ago, and in some spots in America, it's still happening to lesser degrees. But remember, under Joe Biden, Americans were told to stay home, stay off the streets, stay off the beaches, stay out of the parks, don't go to school, don't go to work, God forbid, don't go to church. And if you do manage to sneak your way into church, depending on what part of the nation in which you live, in which you reside, of which you call home, do not sing in church, because everybody who's anybody knows that singing gospel songs spreads the coronavirus like nothing else, like no other activity. That is freedom, Joe Biden style. Back to his announcement.
Fight for our democracy. This shouldn't be a red or blue issue.
It's not a democracy. It's a democratic republic. It's a constitutional republic. It's a republic.
To protect our rights, to make sure that everyone in this country is treated equally. And that
Really? Really? Don't we already have that? We already have in place the foundation for equality. But when Democrats say equally or equality, what they're talking about is equity. They want to guarantee the outcomes and results, no matter what apples to oranges they're comparing. You could have a hard-charging Type A personality working since age 8 to achieve a great capitalistic dream in this country versus a drug-addicted, homeless, ne'er-do-well who wants nothing more than to score his next hit or score his next victim in order to get through his dreary life. And Joe Biden, Democrats, in the name of equity, would like to see both these people have exactly the same, whether we're talking materialistic or opportunistic in life. That's equality, Democrat style. That's equality, Joe Biden style, which is to say, it's not really equality. it's a forced equity. It's government's pick of winners versus losers. And under Democrat pick, it's always the hardworking, independent, individualist American who suffers most. Because, of course, those class of people are required to provide for the other class of people who want nothing more than to take. Socialism, communism. That's what Democrats mean by equality. Back to his speech.
Everyone is given a fair shot at making it.
Oh, jeez.
But you know, around the country, MAGA extremists are lining up to take on those bedrock freedoms.
It's always the MAGA extremists. It's always the Donald Trump supporters. It's always the patriotic Americans who dare to wave the red, white, and blue and dare to stand on principles like founding father virtues and founding father ideals, such as put forth in the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence. It's always those people who are to blame for others not having what Joe Biden considers equality in life. There's no accountability with the Democrat Party. There's no accountability. There's no consequences for actions. There's no sort of self-reliant principles that go along in the Democrat Party. It's all about victimhood. It's all about anger. And he has more than me, and she has more than I. And you know what else goes along with the Democrat Party? Do as I say, not as I do. We saw that under the coronavirus too, didn't we? Gavin Newsom shutting down churches, allowing marijuana shops to stay open, forcing all his citizens of the state to wear face masks. Well, he hops, skips, and jumps and dances off to some elitist gathering of his Democrat Party fundraising friends. No social distancing, no face masks, no concern at all about the coronavirus.
Social Security that you paid for your entire life while cutting taxes for the very wealthy, dictating what health care decisions women can make, banning books, and telling people who they can love.
Oh, I can't take it. It's just more Democrat crap, right? The Democrats are all about making it seem as if Republicans want to keep women barefoot and pregnant in the kitchen and want to keep blacks hanging from trees in some southern state and want to keep out every minority by erecting walls and chain link fences and electrified fences along all the borders, and that Republicans simply want to make money, more money, more money, more money. The big fat capitalist pigs that Barack Obama tried to paint Republicans as. Well, guess what? That sort of narrative is really getting dreary and weary. And it's time for Joe Biden to realize that we need a president who can stand up strong for principles that Americans, patriotic Americans, want for their country. At this point in time, we would just settle for a president who could stand up without help, without the assistance of aides on either side, who doesn't wander off the stage and away from the podium, calling on dead people and so forth. We would settle for that at this point. But when the new election comes around, why settle for a president who won largely by campaigning from the basement with a fawning, adoring media carrying his water across the finish line? Why settle for that again when there are so many more candidates out there who are much better, like the lamp I'm looking at on my desk right now, or Donald Trump. Donald Trump, tried and true, attacked from beginning to end, standing tall still. And guess what? He doesn't call on dead people when he speaks, when he does his rallies. He only calls on living people for that reason alone. You out there should be looking at Donald Trump as the much better president than Joe Biden. That being said, there's a lot going on the left They're going into overdrive, right? They're hyping up, preparing for the next presidential election because they know their candidates stink. They know their puppet presidency is crumbling every day. They know that Joe Biden can't campaign on his successes. All he can campaign on is hate the MAGAs, hate the Donald Trump supporters. They're haters. All he can do is that. And while that may help him with the narrative, because usually after about 3 or 4 words, his sentence starts to crumble and he drifts off and you can't hear the rest of what he's saying. So sticking with just a short narrative for him, hate the MAGAs, MAGAs to blame, Donald Trump stinks, maybe that works for him. But for the rest of Americans, it's time to have a president who actually cares about America, who can actually lead America on a world stage that is rapidly taking over America's leadership spot, and that maybe, understands a little bit about God-given individual liberties and doesn't have so much regard for government doing all for citizens from cradle to grave. Donald Trump has withstood the storm, and he's still standing. And Democrats hate that, and globalists hate that. So what are they doing? Well, they're drumming up indictments and charges and accusations and grabbing porn stars left and right to come out because, if anybody is to be believed in a court of law, it's a porn star, right? They wouldn't lie. And throwing all the darts that they can find at Donald Trump, toward Donald Trump, on the campaign trail of Donald Trump, in hopes of creating a media narrative that Trump is a criminal, Trump belongs in jail, Trump has no business being president. Didn't we already go through this in 2015, 2016? And the American people were like, what? Shut up. We need a president who can control the borders. We don't need any more Kate Steinleys being blown away on California piers as she walks with her father. We don't need any more of that. And Donald Trump provided solutions for that. And Joe Biden's solution is hate Donald Trump. And Donald Trump has ideas and plans to save America from the globalists and the socialists and the Marxists and the Chinese who want to take over America from within and from without. And Joe Biden has a plan called hate Donald Trump. So when you look at what the Democrat Party is doing right now, this is all laying the groundwork, right? This is all laying the groundwork for official campaign 2024 season so they can create little 25-character spots on Twitter where most of their base, most of the Democrat Party base, get their news and get their bullet points. And then they can send their talking parrots out across America to spew forth the same 25 characters over and over and over. Because in Democrats' mind, it's not about telling the truth. It's about repeating lies so often or often enough that those lies become truths in people's minds. That's where they get their votes. That's where they get their voting base from. Lies, deception, spin, but repeated enough times that in the cloudy, foggy, non-critical thinking mind of their voting base, it morphs into truth. At least long enough to get them to the voting box. So let's talk about some of these indictments hitting at Donald Trump and some of the accusations that are pinging at Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas, because they are related, right? You take out all the principled conservatives, you take out all the unafraid to stand up to Democrat slander and libel and lies conservatives, and then what you have left are just quasi-conservatives that are willing to cower in order to avoid being accused by the Democrats. So you look at what's going on in the Democrat camp right now, targeting Donald Trump, targeting Clarence Thomas, targeting whoever else comes out with a strong conservative voice. And you've got to say, hey, this isn't just coincidence. We do have a very important election coming up where the globalists are one step away from really doing some long-term irreversible damage to America. And so it's crucial that the next president in the White House not only continues funding of the World Health Organization and goes along with the World Economic Forum's game plan and is hand in hand with all the UN, United Nations bureaucrats. It's crucial that the next president be all in line for that. Else, the globalists are going to lose steam and go back in their corners, and all those cockroaches in the global bureaucracies will have to regroup and replan and re-strategize and wait out the next 4 years of an America First platform, an America First type of White House. Can't have that. So Democrats are busily, hurriedly scurrying to dredge up all their forces from the dark corners to attack. And it's interesting because it doesn't matter whether these attacks are rooted in truths or fiction, fabrication, myths. Doesn't matter because, as I just said a couple minutes ago, their voting base is not really known for its critical thinking skills. And my guest today has a lot to say about what's going on in American politics right now. His name is Robert Bork Jr. He heads up the Bork Group, which is a crisis and public relations agency. He is the president of the Antitrust Education Project, and he just reissued his father's book, Robert Bork, The Antitrust Paradox, a policy at war with itself. Robert Bork Jr., it's great to have you on Bold and Blunt. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
So there's a lot going on in the media that your area of expertise qualifies you to weigh in with some insightful opinions. As head of the Bork Group, communication strategies expert, and you're also president of the Antitrust Education Project, I wanted to start out by asking you about Donald Trump and his legal woes. Can you weigh in on what you think is going on and what this means for the fate of America politically speaking?
Wow.
Yeah, that's a mouthful, right?
Yeah. Well, look, I think it remains to be seen just how effective the prosecution is going to be in these things. So we only have one current indictment. That's the New York one, which seems to be pretty much stuck together with bubblegum and baling wire. And so I'm not quite sure if there's anything there that's going to actually stick, and what his potential liability is there. It doesn't look like they really have a case, but and it looks like they just stitched something together. The other ones are a little bit more problematic, and I'm sure other guests who know more about this than I do have told you that it seems that on the document case, the documents that he took with him after the White House to Mar-a-Lago, many of which had classified markings, there may be a real problem for him there, particularly in the area of obstruction. But I'm not privy to all the inner workings of that, and whether or not ultimately they're going to be able to make something stick there. But smarter people than I have suggested that that's where his real liability is. People like Andy McCarthy at National Review, former prosecutor, say that looks pretty daunting for him. And then, of course, the Georgia case, which maybe I've heard both sides of that. But one is, what you just have to understand is whether the prosecutor can make stick this notion that he was actually asking the Secretary of State to come up with phony votes, or if he was just sort of in his usual blustering way saying, we need more votes. So I don't know. I think of all of them, the one that looks most dangerous for him is the document case in Mar-a-Lago.
But as a communications expert, you know the power of perception, right? And sometimes perception is even stronger than reality. And Trump has such a committed, determined base. And if you look at polls, even since the indictment, his numbers have risen. If you were advising him on the communications, the PR side of things, would you tell him to just go forward as is, or would you recommend some sort of strategy switch? What would you tell him?
I'm not sure Donald Trump would ever take any advice.
Yeah, he doesn't listen anyhow, but
anymore from anybody. Generally speaking, and this goes back years now, I've always thought that he would have been done better to, bite his tongue. But on the other hand, he seems to be very effective at getting people to, as he said once, I think back in 2016, I could shoot somebody in the middle of Fifth Avenue and no one would indict me. He has a base that doesn't care what he does. And at least a small percentage of it, or a certain percentage of it, feels that way. And who am I to tell Donald Trump to not be Donald Trump? And who would he do it anyway? But I think he would be better off to just dial it down a little bit, because when he is so outrageous, I just don't think that helps him. And frankly, ultimately it's going to be a jury that will decide one or more of these cases. I mean, I think, frankly, a jury in New York could convict him. I think a judge would throw out the result on appeal, but the jury probably be a bunch of people who don't like him, and the same as with these other cases. So ultimately, I think some restraint, which is a word that's not in his vocabulary, would be a good thing.
Yeah, he's a fascinating guy on the political world, isn't he? Because he constantly stumps people who follow politics for a livelihood. They never know what to think of him.
Oh, I know what to think of him, but I don't think it matters to him what anybody else thinks of him. It's funny. I've been around him in person at different times, and he can be a charming guy. He isn't always the bull in the china shop. But when it comes to anybody challenging him or his objectives, he gets quite adamant. And I think sometimes he doesn't play a finesse game at all.
No.
And there are times when I think he would be better off for doing it. But again, he's been doing it his way, like the song says, forever, and seems to have. Hell, he's president of the United States.
Yeah, it doesn't get much higher than that, except maybe Supreme Court Justice, right? Let's look at Clarence Thomas for a second. Have you been following what has been hitting him lately about his reporting and so forth? And do you have any comment to make about how the left seems to be going after him?
Yeah, look, the left is going after him because the left fears him. They fear a conservative African-American in a position of power who refuses to kowtow to their way of thinking, and he's been that way for a long time.
Yep.
I know him personally. He's a strong individual, who's basically, you've heard him say that he will always do the right thing, and I think this kerfuffle about his filings about his financial filings and others is really a lot of smoke. ProPublica doesn't impress me as people who have done, are likely to do or have done an honest accounting of his situation. And there was a wonderful op-ed in the Wall Street Journal by James Toronto that just took the whole thing apart. Perhaps there were some mistakes in the reporting, but it doesn't seem that way. It just seems that they've managed to gin up a perception problem for him, and that's real.
Yeah.
I mean, I understand that as someone who deals in perception. I think he could have done a better job avoiding this, but it's pretty obvious he hasn't done anything illegal, and if they'd done their honest reporting about it, they would have said the same thing.
See, that's the thing, right? It's shameful how the left has managed to use the media as a weapon against this Supreme Court justice, because, as you said, if the media did its due diligence, it would have put it in context. It would have looked at all the other justices, for example, or it would have looked at the reasons why now.
It would have actually read the regs.
Right.
And realized that he didn't violate the regs. The regs aren't simple. They're complicated. But he didn't violate them. And as you mentioned, the media I used to be in the media. I was a reporter and editor for a dozen years or so. Ultimately, quit in 1987 after my father's confirmation hearings. Just said I can't do this anymore because the media is just so corrupt. And I got out of that and decided to get into the game, and at least honestly, as compared to my colleagues in the media. So, and it's only gotten worse since then. The media is a dishonest player in all of this. There are some who are not, but by and large, they think that they have a seat at the table, and they're going to exert it. They're going to exert their authority, but not honestly, and that's very depressing.
Let me ask you this: since you do have experience in the media, do you think that the media, by and large, truly, genuinely believes it's doing a service to Americans, or do you think they are viciously using their positions to attack those on purpose who counter their agenda?
Oh, look, the media is not a monolith. There are people, I think, who are honestly think they're doing the right thing, although I would disagree. And there are people who are doing the right thing. I mean, I think there are media who try to play it down the middle. But for the most part, as an entity, there is they have their worldview is that they are knights in shining armor, and it doesn't, they're going to slay the dragon as they see it, no matter what they have to do. And of course, that's generally speaking from the left, the conservative dragon, as far as they're concerned. So yeah, it almost doesn't matter what they think they are doing and whether they think they're doing the right thing. That's the result.
Right. I wanted to talk to you about another issue as well. The re-release of your father's book, The Antitrust Paradox, A Policy at War with Itself, a title which I find very interesting because I've always looked at antitrust laws and the whole concept of monopolies in America as just another way of saying that the government gets to choose winners versus losers. The system itself seems a little bit anti-capitalistic, anti-free market. Tell me a little bit about your dad's book and how it plays into the modern cultural backlash against big tech.
Well, another big question.
Sorry.
I feel like I should pick one, but I'll pick them all.
Yeah.
Look, antitrust actually is a word that goes back to the late 19th century when many corporations were organized as trusts, and many of these trusts were perceived or seemed to have too much power in the market and over our lives. And so the Sherman Act was in the late 19th century, 1890 something, I think, and it was designed to deal with restraint of trade and collusion and try to bust up these trusts. And then there were two other acts, the FTC Act in the early 20th century and the Clayton Act, and later the another one dealing with Robertson patent. Anyway, but again, better to think of it in terms of competition rather than antitrust. Are these companies competing fairly? Are they growing in size because they're doing something wrong? They're abusing their power,
right?
Or are they growing in size because they make a better mousetrap and are buying better mousetraps? And
right.
And are they doing it fairly? And then once they have this size, are they abusing the consumer? Are they abusing competition? Those are essentially the issues. My father looked at all of this in the 1960s. A graduate of the University of Chicago Law School, an adherent of the Chicago School of Law and Economics, and his basic view was that the law doesn't make any sense. Hence the title, Policy at War with Itself. The law was being used by enforcement by the enforcers and also by the Supreme Court to punish competitors and to protect competitors, not protect competition. And he came to the view that basically looking at economics and law, putting them together, that the consumer is what the law intended. The consumer, the benefit, the welfare of the consumer, hence the consumer welfare standard, is what the law intended. And so he wrote this book in the 60s, but actually got it published in 1978. And by 1979, the Supreme Court, in a case, an antitrust case, cited the book and basically established in its jurisprudence the consumer welfare standard. And it has been the sort of antitrust operating system ever since. And it is a small d democratic neutral principle that says when you're analyzing a merger or an acquisition or business activity, look at how it benefits or harms the consumer, and that's what we've had ever since. Now these days, my father's fears have come true from the 60s that the left would use antitrust law as a gigantic cudgel, a weapon against business, against capitalism.
Right.
And that's what's happening in this administration. President Biden, by appointing Lena Khan, the chair of the Federal Trade Commission, and Jonathan Cantor at the Justice Department Antitrust Division, and sending out an order, 52 orders, for a whole-of-government approach to competition, is really trying to restrain business, basically chill business. Ultimately, I think he's trying to freeze capitalism. He's trying, and because he doesn't, whether he believes this or not, that's what he's doing. He's fossilizing capitalism, and luckily for us, the courts are defending their jurisprudence. So a lot of the cases, a lot of the things actions being brought by those two departments are being struck down. But it can't go on forever. The Biden administration is trying to pack the lower courts with judges who see the world their way, and ultimately trying to change the law, both administratively and by judicial fiat, to again burden business with new restrictions and essentially end the free market.
Which is maybe why, coincidentally, they're going after Clarence Thomas now, right? I mean,
well, I think that would be a benefit for them.
Wouldn't it?
I don't think they're gonna. And you mentioned big tech. I sort of skimmed over that.
Mm-hmm.
Look, big tech is not without fault, particularly when it comes to its suppression of free speech. And I'm first in line when it comes to finding a way to deal with that problem. Maybe we should just sell all of these platforms to Elon Musk. I don't know, but I'm not sure there's enough money to do that. But seriously, we have to figure out a way, whether that's reforming Section 230 or creating new laws that protect both them as publishers and us as users of their systems. We've got to figure that out. But the one thing we shouldn't do, and the one thing that has been pushed by both the left and some on the right, is to apply the antitrust laws to big tech, to basically threaten them with being broken up if they don't do what we want. And of course, this has really been a Trojan horse from the left. Amy Klobuchar, Elizabeth Warren, and others have tricked some on the right, like Ted Cruz and Chuck Grassley, into following along with them, because what their ultimate goal is not simply this free speech issue. Their goal is to layer on more and more controls, so that essentially any CEO has to come to Washington for permission to do anything. And at a time when the big tech or our economy is so innovative, creating jobs, more jobs, better jobs. I mean, look, if we did the things the way the left wants to do them, there would be no AI. There would be, none of these big tech companies. Look at Europe. They have a very restrictive antitrust regime over there. And they're not inventing anything. They're not starting new companies. There's no, French version of Apple, no Palm. I think French word for Apple, I think. Maybe all the French I know. But, So it's not happening over there. It happens here because we have an economy and a system that allows for this innovation and creativity.
Yeah, we have patent laws as well that protect the creator.
Yeah.
So that's huge, unlike other nations. The time just flew by. We touched on so many topics. There were more I wanted to bring to front, but maybe you can come back and be a guest again on Bold and Blunt if you're...
I'd love to. Thank you very much.
In the meanwhile, I really appreciate you weighing in on some of these topics. It was great to speak with you. And the Antitrust Education Project, where can people go to online to find out more about that?
Well, we're very clever. We called it the antitrustEducationProject.org.
Excellent.
And also we have a Twitter account at antitrust.edu. But just put in my name or my father's name at Antitrust, and you'll find all sorts of interesting things to watch and read.
Easy to remember. Thank you. Robert Bork Jr., it's been great to have you here. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you. I enjoyed it.
And another Bold and Blunt episode comes to an end. I want to thank you for listening. I want to remind you, if you like Bold and Blunt, you can get Bold and Blunt at edify.app, at washingtontimes.com, and, of course, wherever podcasts are offered. Tune in next time, and in the meanwhile, stay blunt, stay bold.